I'm very excited to talk to you because I had a guy on, Jamie Metzl yesterday, a scientist who scared the shit out of me, talking about China. He's talking about China. We were talking about China amassing naval power.
Oh.
China's taking over tech companies
Yep.
and how huge they're getting and how much influence they have over their people as opposed to the way we do it.
Well, he's not wrong.
No.
He's not, yeah, I can't spot the lie in what you just said, but I mean, look, there's so much we can talk about, but if you think about it, just in the past handful of months, there was this SolarWinds hack, right, by the Russians. So the Russians go in, they hack into a company called SolarWinds. That is an IT management software company that happens to be fairly deep into government organizations, agencies, Treasury, and a variety of others throughout the U.S. government. And they're also into parts of the intel community, Defense Department, and a lot of commercial sectors. So anyway, the Russians figure this out. Now, around about December or January, Microsoft, identified this as a problem. And I think it was the head of Microsoft said, this looks like the most sophisticated attack we've ever seen. So this is December, January timeframe. And they're still trying to figure out the depth of this hack by Russians. At the same time, and going back months and months and months and months before, the Chinese had been engaged in a more sophisticated attack that, while everyone is focused on what's going on and so fully aware that we got problems, right, from nation states out there who don't like us, everybody's talking about SolarWinds, and now it's, they've just now released information about the Chinese attack against Microsoft Exchange servers, running the Exchange email systems. And this thing is enormous. And so the Chinese, we've been so focused for 4 years on the Russians, and they're out there to cause us all sorts of problems. So we should be focused on them. But it's China that's the biggest problem. And so this guy is absolutely right. Jamie's right.
It was terrifying.
Yeah.
Listen to what he was talking about, the way he was explaining how they have this plan. I think he said 2049 to be the global superpower of the world and essentially take the place of what America used to be.
Yeah,
but do it their way.
And they do it their way, which means we're going to bypass all the costs and the heavy lift of research and development over the years, and we're just going to steal everything.
Yeah.
And they've been doing it for decades. So people think, oh, China, it's a problem. We've talked about this before. Yeah. This idea that perhaps this is just something relatively new, or it's popped up during the previous administration of Trump. And honest God's truth is, it's been going on for decades. And they decided that that's how they're going to get to the top of the food chain, is by stealing shit, because it's a lot easier to hoover up everything and then reverse engineer it. And the technology has made it even easier, right? It used to be old school. They'd go out and recruit somebody. They'd find some Chinese American working for a company here in the States. They'd appeal to sort of, you got to help the motherland, and they would. And that was the old school way of doing it. But, cyber theft it's incredible what they're able to do. And this latest attack, while they're still trying to sort out the mess, right?
So when they do this, so if they get into this email server, are they targeting anything specific? Is there specific companies? Are they just like throwing a net out there and seeing what they catch?
Yes, is the answer to both of those. It looks like what happened here was that their initial point of attack, or the initial focus, was intelligence, right? So then it branched out, and it branched out very, very quickly, right, to hit everything, small companies, medium-sized companies. And that's kind of the MO for the Chinese. The Chinese regime, right, their intel operations, they've got this long vision. And they've also got the resources, and they've got the desire to hoover up everything and then sort it out later. We take, as a country, we take a very sort of targeted approach, right? We say, okay, this is a piece of information that's a priority tasking for the U.S., for our national security. We're going to go out, we're going to figure out who has access to it. We're going to develop a very sort of surgical strike to figure out how do we get to somebody who's got this piece of information. That's typically how we or some of our allies would operate. The Russians, the Chinese have always had a different approach. I mean, the Russians is less elegant. The Russians are just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks, right? But the Chinese, they've got this long view, and they've also got this ability. And so in this particular attack that they're still trying to assess, that was perpetrated by, Chinese state-sponsored hackers based in China. They're just going to take everything, and then they'll sift through it. They'll figure out what they got. A lot of it's going to be just, chafe, not of interest, but they're going to find a lot of gold in there too. And they're willing to do that because they've got the patience to do it. They'll develop a target. They'll develop a potential recruit for years and years and years. Or they'll infiltrate a society or an organization, right? They'll put a student out here who's actually working for the PLA, for their intel operations, and they'll put him out as an undergrad. And then they'll go to school, and they'll get good grades, and they'll go to grad school, and then they'll get a job, and they'll get another job, and then 30 years down the line, it may pay off. But they're willing to make that investment. So, and intelligence, they can't, because that's how they're meeting those goals.
There's also some talk about them buying U.S. farmland. Someone just brought this up to me the other day, that they just bought an enormous farm somewhere in the middle of America, and their number one priority is feeding China.
Yeah. They've been doing all sorts of things. I mean, we could literally sit here all day long talking about what they've been up to. But you're right. The Bureau had a great report not that long ago. It was a culmination of years of investigation, and one of the interesting things that they were doing was looking at the financial side of things. Rather than kind of thinking of individual counterintelligence operations, they started looking at Chinese companies, whether they were state-owned or whether they were just, theoretically private, but they had 2 or 3 cutouts between them and the state. And they were looking at their deals, and they're saying, well, why would they do this? And if it's a private company that's out there to make money and to become successful, to be successful, to grow, why would they be making deals that seem not profitable? What's the point of that exercise? And so, aside from just acquiring assets, and China's over the years has acquired a massive amount of property and other assets here in the U.S. and around the world, is the idea that it's a very clever part of their investigation from a Bureau perspective, is to say, all right, let's look at a Chinese company like ZTE or Huawei, and let's try to understand why would they possibly be giving away their products basically at dirt cheap prices. Why would they be interested in acquiring land in a particular area? Why would they want to work with a particular regional telecoms provider here in the U.S.? And when you do that, their activity becomes pretty clear. Even to people who are skeptics, it becomes pretty obvious that, look, just Huawei alone, they've, over the years, going back to 2000 and before that, Huawei as a telecoms company started in '87, and they're now the largest producer of telecoms gear in the world. They do all the plumbing, right? They do the antennas, they do the routers, they do the servers. You look at a cell tower now, anywhere in the Midwest or out west, anywhere, and it's likely got Huawei or ZTE or other Chinese components on that cell tower. And one of the reports that the Bureau came out with after a lengthy investigation is fascinating, and I'm pretty sure you've seen this report. That you look at the I-25 corridor. It goes up Wyoming, Colorado, that area. It's along the border of Nebraska. They did a deal with a regional telecoms provider out there, Viero, I think it was, and they now have over the years, they've put their equipment, Huawei has, onto these cell towers that go up and down this corridor. Well, the other thing that's up and down this corridor are a variety of military bases and an enormous number of ICBM sites for our nuke program, right? So the idea that China was just, willingly giving at vastly discounted prices their gear to a regional provider in part of the U.S. where we have an enormous number of ICBM sites, I don't know. It could be a coincidence, it's a perfect example of what they do and how they're willing to invest state resources and how smart they are at long-term targeting and understanding. I want to know about this. That's where the information is. I'm going to get access to it, and I don't care whether it takes me 10, 20, 30 years.
So we're having this conversation, and you're explaining this to me. I would imagine that if I was a person in a position of power in government, I would want to stop this from happening. So how did it ever happen?
Well, it wasn't really noticed. It wasn't.
What?
Nobody. Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, it's been a thing for a handful of years. When you think about it, if you think about Huawei's been doing this for. I mean, look, we could talk about what they did up in Canada too. To one of the world's biggest companies up in Canada in telecoms, or roughly the same time. But anyway, a couple of years ago, what are we? We're in 2022 now. So a couple of years ago, when they released this information, when they finished their investigation, and they looked and they said, "This is bullshit." Right? Because one of the things about this equipment that's sitting on these cell towers is people will say, "Well, who cares? It's telecoms. You know, it's my mobile phone. I don't care if the Chinese regime listens into my mobile phone." Well, the PLA's third department and their first technical reconnaissance bureau and other parts of the Chinese machine that hoovers up all this information that's related to our national security interests, they're not just going after, commercial cell phone signals. This part of this investigation was to break down this equipment and try to understand, okay, wait a minute, could this be going after the DoD spectrum, the bandwidth that the military would use? And if so, what does that mean? Could they intercept communications? Yes, according to the investigation. And could they interfere with our communications? So not just hoover up data packets that are going across this, but also imagine if we're trying to send communications, things get really hot. They go after Taiwan, suddenly we're going on high alert. They could either intercept or block, jam. I'm having a senior moment. Communications, trying to get through on those capabilities, and so it's a big deal.